Dramatis Personae for The Inventions of the Idiot. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. Dramatis Personae.
The Idiot, read by Algy Pug.
Mr. Pedagogue, read by Adam Bratcher.
Mrs. Smithers-Pedagog, read by TriciaG.
The Doctor, read by Raken.
The Bibliomaiac, read by Availle.
Mr. Poet, read by Matthew Reece.
Mr. Whitechoker, a.k.a. the Minister, read by Aidan Brack.
The Old Gentleman Who Occasionally Imbibed, read by Om123.
Narrated by Peac. End of Dramatis Personae. The Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. Chapter 1. The Culinary Guild. It was before the Idiot's marriage, and in the days when he was nothing more than a plain boarder in Mrs. Smithers-Pedagog's high-class home for single gentlemen, that he put what the Schoolmaster termed his alleged mind on plans for the amelioration of the condition of the civilized.
The trials of the barbarian are really nothing as compared with the tribulations of civilized man,
he said as the waitress passed him a piece of steak that had been burned to a crisp.
In the Cannibal Islands, a cook who would send a piece of broiled missionary to her employer's table in this condition would herself be roasted before another day had dawned. We, however, must grin and bear it, because our esteemed landlady cannot find anywhere in this town a woman better suited for the labours of the kitchen than the blank she has had the misfortune to draw in the Culinary lottery, familiarly known to us, her victims, as Bridget.
This is an exceptional case,
said Mr. Pedagog.
We haven't had a steak like this before in several weeks.
True,
returned the Idiot.
This is a sirloin, I believe. The last steak we had was a rump steak, and was not burned to a crisp, I admit. It was only boiled, if I remember rightly, by mistake, Bridget having lost her 5th consecutive cousin in 10 days the night before, and being in consequence so prostrated that she could not tell a gridiron from a lawn-mower.
Well, you know the popular superstition, Mr. Idiot,
said the poet.
The devil sends the cooks.
I don't believe it,
retorted the Idiot.
That's one of those proverbs that haven't a particle of truth in 'em, nor a foundation in reason either, like, never look a gift-horse in the mouth. Of all absurd advice ever given to a man by a thoughtless thinker, that, I think, bears the palm. I know a man who didn't look a gift-horse in the mouth, and the consequence was that he accepted a horse that was 28 years old. The beast died in his stables 3 days later, and the beneficiary had to pay $5 to have him carted away. As for the devil sending the cooks, I haven't any faith in the theory. Any person who had come from the devil would know how to manage a fire better than 99% of the cooks ever born. It would be a good thing if every one of them were forced to serve an apprenticeship with the Prince of Darkness. However, steak like this serves a good purpose. It serves to bind our little circle more firmly together. There's nothing like mutual suffering to increase the sympathy that should exist between men situated as we are. And as for Mrs. Smithers-Pedagog, I wish her to understand distinctly that I am criticising the cook, and not herself. If this particular dainty had been prepared by her own fair hand, I doubt not I should want more of it.
I thank you,
returned the landlady, somewhat mollified by this remark.
If I had more time, I should occasionally do the cooking myself, but as it is, I'm overwhelmed with work.
I can bear witness to that,
observed Mr. Whitechoker.
Mrs. Smithers-Pedagog is one of the most useful ladies in my congregation. If it were not for her, many a heathen would be going without garments today.
Well, I don't like to criticise,
said the Idiot,
but I think the heathen at home should be considered before the heathen abroad. If your congregation would have a guild to look after such heathen as the poet and the doctor and myself, I am convinced it would be more appreciated by those who benefited by its labours than it is at present by the barbarians who try and wear the misfits it sends out. A Christian whose plain but honest breakfast is well cooked is apt to be far more grateful than a barbarian who is wearing a pair of trousers made of calico, and a coat 3 sizes too small in the body and 9 sizes too large in the arms. I will go further. I believe that if the domestic heathen were cared for, they would do much better work, would earn better pay, and would, out of mere gratitude, set apart a sufficiently large portion of their increased earnings to be devoted to the purchase of tailor-made costumes, which would please the cannibals better, far better, than the amateur creations they now get. I know I'd contribute some of my surplus.
What would you have such a guild do?
Queried Mr. Whitechoker.
Do? There'd be so much for it to do that the members could hardly find time to rest.
Returned the idiot.
Do? Why, my dear sir, take this house, for instance, and see what it could do here. What a boon it would be for me if some kind-hearted person would come here once a week, and sew buttons on my clothes, darn my socks, in short, keep me mended. What better work for one who desires to make the world brighter, happier, and less sinful?
I fail to see how the world would be brighter, happier, or less sinful if your suspender buttons were kept firm and your stockings darned, and your wardrobe generally mended,
said Mr. Pedagog.
I grant that such a guild would be doing a noble work if it would take you in hand and correct many of your impressions, revise your well-known facts so as to bring them more in accord with indubitable truths, and impart to your custom some of that polish which you earnestly strive for in your dress.
Thank you,
said the idiot suavely.
But I don't wish to overburden the kind ladies to whom I refer. If my costumes could be looked after, I might find time to look after my customs, and I assure you, Mr. Pedagog, if at any time you will undertake to deliver a course of lectures on etiquette, I will gladly subscribe for 2 orchestra chairs and endeavour to occupy both of them. At any rate, to return to the main point, I claim that the world would be happier and brighter and less sinful if the domestic heathen were kept mended by such a guild, and I challenge anyone here to deny, even on so slight a basis as the loose suspender button, the truth of what I say. When I arise in the morning and find a button gone, do I make genial remarks about the joys of life? I do not. I use words, sometimes one word, which need not be repeated here. I am unhappy, and being unhappy, the world seems dark and dreary, and in speaking impatiently, though very much to the point, as I do, I am guilty of an offence that is sinful. With such a start in the morning, I come here to the table. Mr. Pedagog sees that I am not quite myself. He asks me if I am not feeling well, an irritating question at any time, but particularly so to a man with the suspender button gone. I retort. He re-retorts, until our converse is warmer than the coffee, and our relations colder than the waffles. Finally I leave the house, slamming the door behind me, structurally weakening the house, and go to business, where I wreak my vengeance upon the second clerk, who takes it out of the office boy, who goes home and vents his wrath on his little sister, who, goaded into recklessness, teases the baby until he yells, and gets spanked by his mother for being noisy. Now, why should a loose suspender button be allowed to subject that baby to such humiliation? And who can deny that, if it had been properly sewed on by a guild, such as I have mentioned, the baby never would have been spanked for the causes mentioned? What is your answer, Mr. Whitechoker?
Truly, I am so breathless at your logic that I cannot reason,
said the minister.
But haven't we digressed a little? We were speaking of cooks, and we conclude with a pathetic little allegory about a suspender button and a baby that is not only teased, but spanked.
The baby could get the same spanking for reasons based on the shortcomings of the cooks, said the idiot. I am irritated when I am served with green peas hard enough to batter down Gibraltar if properly aimed, when my coffee is a warmed-over reminiscence of last night's demi-tasse. I leave the house in a frame of mind that bodes ill for the junior clerk, and the effect on the baby is ultimately the same.
And you'd have the ladies whose energies are now devoted towards the clothing of the heathen come here and do the cooking?
Queried the schoolmaster.
I leave, if they do,
said the doctor.
I have seen too much of the effects of amateur cookery in my profession to want any of it. They are good cooks in theory, but not in practice.
There you have it,
said the idiot triumphantly.
Right in a nutshell. That's where the cooks are always weak. They have none of the theory and all of the practice. If they based practice on theory, they'd cook better. Wherefore let your theoretical cook seek out the practical, and instruct them in the principles of the culinary art. Think of what 12 ladies could do. 12 ladies trained in the sewing circle to talk rapidly, working 5 hours a day apiece, could devote an hour a week to 360 cooks, and tell them practically all they themselves know in that time. And if, in addition to this, 12 other ladies, forming an auxiliary guild, would make dresses and bonnets and things for the same cooks, instead of for the cannibals, it would keep them good-natured.
Splendid scheme,
said the doctor.
So practical. Your brain must weigh half an ounce.
I've never had it weighed,
said the idiot.
But I fancy it's a good one. It's the only one I have, anyhow, and has done me good service, and shows no signs of softening. But returning to the cooks, good nature is as essential to the making of a good cook as are apples to the making of a dumpling. You can't associate the word dumpling with ill nature, and just as the poet throws himself into his work, and as he is of a cheerful or a mournful disposition, so does his work appear cheerful or mournful. So do the productions of a cook take on the attributes of their maker. A dyspeptic cook will prepare food in a manner so indigestible that it were ruin to partake of it. A light-hearted cook will make light bread. A pessimistic cook will serve flour bricks in lieu thereof.
I think possibly you're right when you say that,
said the doctor.
I have myself observed that the people who sing at their work do the best work.
But the worst singing,
growled the schoolmaster.
That may be true,
put in the idiot.
But you cannot expect a cook on $16 a month to be a prima donna. Now, if Mr. Whitechoker will undertake to start a sewing circle in his church for people who don't care to wear clothing, but to sow the seeds of concord and good cookery throughout the kitchens of this land, I am prepared to prophesy that at the end of the year there will be more happiness and less depression in this part of the world. And once eliminate dyspepsia from our midst, and get civilization and happiness controvertible terms, then you will find your foreign missionary funds waxing so fat that instead of the amateur garments for the heathen you now send them, you will be able to open an account at Worths and Pools for every barbarian in creation. The scheme for the sewing on of suspender buttons, and the miscellaneous mending that needs to be done for lone-lorn savages like myself, might be left in abeyance until a culinary scheme has been established. Bachelors constitute a small class only, of humanity, but the regeneration of cooks is a universal need.
I think your scheme is certainly a picturesque one, and novel,
said Mr. Whitechoker.
There seems to be a good deal in it. Don't you think so, Mr. Pedagog?
Yes, I do,
said Mr. Pedagog, wearily.
A great deal of language.
And amid the laugh at his expense which followed, the idiot, joining in, departed. End of chapter 1. Of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 2. A Suggestion for the Cable Cars.
Hey-ho,
sighed the idiot, rubbing his eyes sleepily.
This is a weary world.
What? This from you?
Smiled the poet.
I never expected to hear that plaint from a man of your cheerful disposition.
Said the idiot, with difficulty repressing a yawn.
And may I add likewise, toot. What do you take me for, an insulated sunbeam? I can't help it if shadows camp across my horizon occasionally. I wouldn't give a cent for the man who has never had his moments of misery. It takes night to enable us to appreciate daytime. Misery is a foil necessary to the full appreciation of joy. I'm glad I'm sort of down in the mouth today. I'll be all right tomorrow, and I'll enjoy tomorrow all the more for today's megrim. But for the present, I repeat, this is a weary world.
Oh, I don't think so,
observed the schoolmaster.
The world doesn't seem to me to betray any signs of weariness. It got to work at the usual hour this morning, and as far as I can judge, has been revolving at the usual rate of speed ever since.
The idiot's mistake,
put in the doctor,
is a common one. I find it frequently in my practice.
That's a confession,
retorted the idiot.
Do you find out these mistakes in your practice before or after the death of the patient?
That mistake,
continued the doctor, paying apparently little heed to the idiot's remark.
that mistake lies in the idiot's assumption that he is himself the world. He regards himself as the earth, as all of life, and, because he happens to be weary, the world is a weary one.
It isn't a fatal disease, is it?
Queried the idiot anxiously.
I am not likely to become so impressed with that idea, for instance, that I shall have to be put in a padded cell and manacled so I do not turn perpetual handsprings, under the hallucination that, being the world, it is my duty to revolve?
No,
replied the doctor, with a laugh.
No, indeed. That's not at all likely to happen. But I think it would be a good idea if you were to carry the hallucination out far enough to put a cake of ice on your head, assuming that to be the North Pole, and cool off that brain of yours.
That is a good idea,
returned the idiot.
And if Mary will bring me the ice that was used to cool the coffee this morning, I shall be pleased to try the experiment. Meanwhile, this is a weary world.
Then why under the canopy don't you leave it and go to some other world?
Snapped Mr. Pedagog.
You are under no obligation to remain here. With a river on either side of the city and a New York Juggernaut Company Unlimited running trolley cars up and down two of our more prominent highways, suicide is within reach of all. Of course, we should be so sorry to lose you in a way, but I have known men to recover from even greater afflictions than that.
Thank you for the suggestion,
replied the idiot, transferring 4 large porous buckwheat cakes to his plate.
Thank you very much, but I have a pleasanter and more lingering method of suicide right here. Death by buckwheat cakes is like being pierced by a Toledo blade. You do not realize the terrors of your situation until you cease to be susceptible to them. Furthermore, I do not believe in suicide. It is, in my judgment, the worst crime a man can commit, and I cannot but admire the remarkable discernment evinced by the fates in making of it its own inevitable capital punishment. A man may commit murder and escape death, but in the commission of suicide he is sure of execution. Just as virtue is its own reward, so is suicide its own amercement.
Been reading the dictionary again?
Asked the poet.
No, not exactly,
said the idiot, with a smile.
But it's a kind of joke on me, I suppose. I've just been stuck, to use a polite term, on a book called Roget's Thesaurus, and if I want to get hold of a new word that will increase my seeming importance to the community, I turn to it. That's where I got amercement. I don't hold that its use in this especial case is beyond cavil. That's another thesaurian term. But I don't suppose anyone here would notice that fact. It goes here, and I shall not use it elsewhere.
I am interested to know how you ever became the owner of a thesaurus,
said the schoolmaster, with a grim smile at the idea of the idiot having such a book in his possession.
Except on the score of affinities. You are both very wordy.
Meaning pleonastic, I presume,
retorted the idiot.
I beg your pardon,
said the schoolmaster.
Never mind,
said the idiot.
I won't press the analogy, but I will say that those who are themselves periphrastic should avoid criticizing others for being ambaginous.
I think you mean ambiguous,
said the schoolmaster, elevating his eyebrows in triumph.
I thought you'd think that,
retorted the idiot.
That's why I used the word ambaginous. I'll lend you my dictionary to freshen up your phraseology. Meanwhile, I'll tell you how I happened to get a thesaurus. I thought it was an animal, and when I saw that a New York bookseller had a lot of them marked down from $2 to $1, I sent and got one. I thought it was strange for a bookseller to be selling rare animals, but that was his business, not mine. And as I was anxious to see what kind of a creature a thesaurus was, I invested. When I found out it was a book, and not a tame relic of the antediluvian animal kingdom, I thought I wouldn't say anything about it. But you people here are so inquisitive, you've learned my secret.
And wasn't it an animal?
Asked Mrs. Smithers-Pedagog.
My dear,
ejaculated Mr. Pedagog.
Pray, I beg of you, do not enter into this discussion.
No, Mrs. Pedagog,
observed the idiot.
It was not. It was nothing more than a book, which, once you have read it, you would not be without, since it gives your vocabulary a twist which makes you proof against 99 out of every 100 conversationalists in the world, no matter how weak your cause.
I am beginning to understand the causes of your weariness,
observed Mr. Pedagog acridly.
You have been memorizing syllables. Really, I should think you were in danger of phonetic prostration.
Not a bit of it,
said the idiot.
Those words are stimulating, not depressing. I begin to feel better already, now that I have spoken them. I am not half so weary as I was, but for my weariness I had good cause. I suffered all night from a most frightful nightmare. It utterly destroyed my rest.
Well's rarebit?
Queried the genial old gentleman who occasionally imbibed, with a tone of reproach.
If so, why was I not with you?
The question should be its own answer,
replied the idiot.
A man who will eat a Welsh rarebit alone is not only a person of a sullen disposition, but of reckless mould as well. I would no sooner think of braving a Welsh rarebit unaccompanied than I would think of trying to swim across the British Channel without a life-saving boat following in my wake.
I question if so light a body as you could have a wake,
said Mr. Pedagog coldly.
I am sorry, but I can't agree with you, Mr. Pedagog,
said the Bibliomaiac.
A tugboat, most insignificant of crafts, roils up the surface of the sea more than an ocean steamer does. Fuss goes with feathers more than with large bodies.
Well, they're neither of them in it with a cake of soap for real bona fide suds,
said the idiot complacently as he helped himself to his 13th buckwheat cake.
However, wakes have nothing to do with the case. I had a most frightful dream, and it was not due to Welsh rarebits, but to my fatal weakness, which, not having my thesaurus at hand, I must identify by the commonplace term of courtesy. You may not have noticed it, but courtesy is my strong point.
We haven't observed the fact,
said Mr. Pedagog.
But what of it? Have you been courteous to anyone?
I have,
replied the idiot.
And a nightmare is what it has brought me. I rode uptown on a trolley car last night, and I gave up my seat to 16 ladies, 2 of whom, by the way, thanked me.
I don't see why more than one of them should thank you,
sniffed the landlady.
If a man gives up a trolley car seat to 16 ladies, only one of them can occupy it.
I stand corrected,
said the idiot.
I gave up a seat to ladies 16 times between City Hall and 23rd Street. I can't bring myself to sit down while a woman stands, and every time I'd get a seat, some woman would get on the car. Hence it was that I gave up my seat to 16 ladies. Why 2 of them should thank me, considering the rules, I do not know. It certainly is not the custom. At any rate, if I had walked uptown, I should not have had more exercise than I got on that car, bobbing up and down so many times, and lurching here and lurching there every time the car stopped, started, or turned a corner. Whether it was the thanks or the lurching I got, I don't know, but the incidents of the ride were so strongly impressed upon me that I dreamed all night. Only in my dreams I was not giving up car seats. The first seat I gave up to a woman in the dream was an $80,000 seat in the Stock Exchange. It was expensive courtesy, but I did it, and mourned so over the result that I waked up and discovered that it was but a dream. Then I went to sleep again. This time I was at the opera. I had the best seat in the house, when in came a woman who hadn't a chair. Same result. I got up. She sat down, and I had to stand behind a pillar where I could neither see nor hear. More grief. Waked up again, more tired than when I went to bed. In 10 minutes I dozed off. Found myself an ambitious statesman running for the presidency. Was elected and inaugurated. Up comes a woman's rights candidate. More courtesy. Gave up the presidential chair to her and went home to obscurity, when again I awoke tireder than ever. Clock struck 4. Fell asleep again. This time I was prepared for anything that might happen. I found myself in a trolley car, but with me I had a perforated share-bottom, such as the street peddlers sell. Lady got aboard. I put the perforated share-bottom on my lap and invited her to sit down. She thanked me and did so. Then another lady got on. The lady on my lap moved up and made room for the second lady. She sat down. Between them they must have weighed 300 pounds. I could have stood that, but as time went on more ladies got aboard, and every time that happened these first comers would move up and make room for them. How they did it I can't say, any more than I can say how in real life 3 women can find room in a car seat vacated by a little child. They did the former just as they do the latter, until finally I found myself flattened into the original bench like the pattern figure of a carpet. I felt like an intaglio. 30 women by actual count were pressing me to remain, as it were, but the worst of it all was they none of them seemed to live anywhere. We rode on and on and on, but nobody got off. I tried to move, and couldn't. We passed my corner, but there I was fixed. I couldn't breathe, and so couldn't call out, and I verily believe that if I hadn't finally waked up, I should by this time have reached Hong Kong, for I have a distinct recollection of passing through Chicago, Denver, San Francisco, and Honolulu. Finally I did wake, however, simply worn out with my night's rest, which, gentlemen, is why I say, as I have already said, this is a weary world.
Well, I don't blame you,
said Mr. Whitechoker kindly.
That was a most remarkable dream.
Yes,
assented Mr. Pedagog.
But quite in line with his waking thoughts.
Very likely,
said the idiot, rising and preparing to depart.
It was absurd in most of its features, but in one of them it was excellent. I am going to see the president of the Electric Juggernaut Company, as you call it, in regard to it to-day. I think there is money in that idea of having an extra chair seat for every passenger to hold in his lap. In that way twice as many seated passengers can be accommodated, and countless people with tender feet will be spared the pain of having other wayfarers standing upon them.
End of chapter 2. Of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 3. The Transatlantic Trolley Company.
If I were a millionaire,
began the idiot one Sunday morning as he and his friends took their accustomed seats at the breakfast table,
I would devote 1/10 of my income to the poor, 1/10 to children's fresh air funds, and the balance to the education through travel of a dear and intimate friend of mine.
That would be a generous distribution of your wealth,
said Mr. Whitechoker graciously.
But upon what would you live yourself?
I should stipulate in the bargain with my dear and intimate friend that we should be inseparable, that wherever he should go I should go, and that, of the funds devoted to his education through travel, 1/2 should be paid to me as my commission for letting him into a good thing.
You certainly have good business sense,
put in the Bibliomaiac.
I wish I had when I was collecting rare editions.
Collecting rare books and a good business sense seldom go together, I fancy,
said the idiot.
I began collecting books once, but I gave it up and took to collecting coins. I chose my coin and devoted my time to getting in that variety alone, and it has paid me.
I don't exactly gather your meaning,
said Mr. Whitechoker.
You chose your coin?
Precisely. I said, here, most coin collectors spend their time looking for 1 or 2 rare coins, for which, when they are found, they pay fabulous prices. The result is oftentimes penury. I, on the other hand, will look for coins of a common sort, which do not command fabulous prices. So I chose United States $5 gold pieces, irrespective of dates, for my collection, and the result is moderate affluence. I have between 60 and 100 of them at my savings bank, and when I have found it necessary to realize on them, I have not experienced the slightest difficulty in forcing them back into circulation at cost.
You are a wise idiot,
said the Bibliomaiac, settling back in his chair in a disgusted, tired sort of way. He had expected some sympathy from the idiot as a fellow collector, even though their aims were different. It is always difficult for a man whose $10,000 library has brought $600 in the auction room to find, even in the ranks of collectors, one who understands his woes and helps him bear the burden thereof by expressions of confidence in his sanity.
Then you believe in travel, do you?
asked the doctor.
I believe there is nothing broadens the mind so much,
returned the idiot.
But do you believe it will develop a mind where there isn't one?
asked the schoolmaster unpleasantly.
Or, to put it more favorable, don't you think there would be danger in taking the germ of a mind in a small head and broadening it until it runs the risk of finding itself confined to cramped quarters?
That is a question for a physician to answer,
said the idiot.
But if I were you, I wouldn't travel if I thought there was any danger.
Tu quoque,
retorted the schoolmaster.
Is not true repartee.
I shall have to take your word for that,
returned the idiot,
since I have not a Latin dictionary with me, and all the Latin I know is to be found in the quotations in the back of my dictionary, like status quo ante, in vino veritas, and et tu, Brute. However, as I said before, I'd like to travel, and I would if it were not that the sea and I are not on very good terms with each other. It makes me ill to cross the East River on the bridge. I'm so susceptible to seasickness.
You'd get over that in a very few days,
said the genial old gentleman who occasionally imbibed.
I have crossed the ocean 12 times, and I am never seasick after the 3rd day out.
Ah, but those 3 days,
said the idiot.
They must resemble the 3 days of grace on a note that you know you couldn't pay if you had 3 years of grace. I couldn't stand them, I'm afraid. Why, only last summer I took a drive off in the country, and the motion of the wagon going over the thank ye marms in the road made me so seasick before I had gone a mile that I wanted to lie down and die. I think I should have done so if the horse hadn't run away and forced me to ride back home whether I wanted to or not.
You ought to find that,
said the doctor,
by and by, if you give way to a weakness of that sort. The creases in your morning newspaper will affect you similarly as you read it. If you ever have a birthday, let us know, and we will help you to overcome the tendency by buying you a baby jumper for you to swing around in every morning until you get used to the motion.
It would be more to the purpose,
replied the idiot,
if you, as a physician, would invent a preventive of seasickness. I'd buy a bottle and go abroad at once on my coin collection if you would guarantee it to kill or to cure instantaneously.
And there's such a nostrum,
said the doctor.
There is indeed,
put in the genial old gentleman who occasionally imbibes.
I have tried it.
And were you seasick?
asked the doctor.
I never knew,
replied the genial old gentleman.
It made me so ill that I never thought to inquire what was the matter with me. But one thing is certain, I'll take my sea voyages straight after this.
I'd like to go by rail,
said the idiot after a moment's thought.
That is a desire quite characteristic of you,
said the schoolmaster.
It is so probable that you could. Why not say that you'd like to cross the Atlantic on a tightrope?
Because I have no such ambition,
replied the idiot.
Though it might be fun if the tightrope were a trolley wire, and one could sit comfortably in a spacious cab while speeding over the water, I should think that would be exhilarating enough. Just imagine how fine it would be on a stormy day to sit looking out of your cab window far above the surface of the raging and impotent sea, skipping along at electric speed and daring the waves to do their worst. That would be bliss.
And so practical,
growled the Bibliomaiac.
Bliss rarely is practical,
said the idiot.
Bliss is a sort of mugwump blessing, too full of the ideal and too barren in practicability.
Well,
said Mr. Whitechoker,
I don't know why we should say the trolley cars between New York and London never can be. If we had told our grandfathers 100 years ago that a cable for the transmission of news could be laid under the sea, they would have laughed us to scorn.
That's true,
said the schoolmaster.
But we know more than our grandfathers did.
Well, rather,
interrupted the idiot.
My great-grandfather, who died in 1799, had never even heard of Andrew Jackson, and if you asked him what he thought of Darwin, he'd have thought you were guying him.
Respect for age, sir,
retorted Mr. Pedagog,
restrains me from characterizing your great-grandfather if, as you intimate, he knows less than you do. However, apart from the comparative lack of knowledge in the idiot's family, Mr. Whitechoker, you must remember that with the advance of the centuries, we have ourselves developed a certain amount of brains, enough at least to understand that there is a limit even to the possibilities of electricity. Now, when you say that just because an Atlantic cable would have been regarded as an object of derision in the 18th century, we should not deride one who suggests the possibility of a marine trolley road between London and New York in the 20th century. It appears to me that you are talking, I don't like to say nonsense to one of your cloth, but...
Through his hat is the idiom you are trying to recall, I think, Mr. Pedagog,
said the Idiot.
Mr. Whitechoker is talking through his hat, is what you mean to say?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Idiot,
said the schoolmaster.
but when I find that I need your assistance in framing my conversation, I shall give up talking. I mean to say that I don't think Mr. Whitechoker can justify his conclusions and talks without giving the subject concerning which he has spoken due reflection. The cable runs along the solid foundation of the bed of the sea. It is a simple matter, comparatively, but a trolley wire stretched across the ocean by the simplest rules of gravitation cannot be made to stay up.
No doubt you are correct,
said Mr. Whitechoker meekly.
I did not mean that I expected to see a trolley road across the sea, but I did mean to say that man has made such wonderful advances in the past 100 years that we cannot really state the limit of his possibilities. It is manifest that no one today can devise a plan by means of which such a wire could be carried, but...
I fear you gentlemen would starve as inventors,
said the Idiot.
What's the matter with balloons?
Balloons for what?
retorted Mr. Pedagog.
For holding up the trolley wires,
replied the Idiot.
It is perfectly feasible. Fasten the ends of your wire in London and New York, and from coast to coast station 2 lines of sufficient strength to keep the wire raised as far above the level of the sea as you require. That's simple enough.
And what, pray, in this frenzy of elements, this raging storm of which you have spoken,
said Mr. Pedagog impatiently,
what would then keep your balloons from blowing away?
The trolley wire, of course,
said the Idiot. Mr. Pedagog lapsed into a hopelessly wrathful silence for a moment, and then he said,
Well, I sincerely hope your plan is adopted, and that the promoters will make you superintendent, with an office in the mid-ocean balloon.
Thank you for your good wishes, Mr. Pedagog,
the Idiot answered.
If they are realized, I shall remember them and show my gratitude to you by using my influence to have you put in charge of the gas service. Meanwhile, however, it seems to me that our ocean steamships could be developed along logical lines so that the trip from New York to Liverpool could be made in a very much shorter period of time than is now required.
We are getting back to the common sense again,
said the Bibliomaiac.
That is a proposition to which I agree. 10 years ago, 8 days was considered a good trip. With the development of the twin-screw steamer, the time has been reduced to approximately 6 days.
Or a saving, really, of 2 days because of the extra screw,
said the Idiot.
Precisely,
observed the Bibliomaiac.
So that, provided there are extra screws enough, there isn't any reason why the trip should not be made in 2 or 3 hours.
What was that?
said the Bibliomaiac.
I don't exactly follow you.
1 extra screw, you say, has saved 2 days?
Yes.
Then 2 extra screws would save 4 days, 3 would save 6 days, and 5 extra screws would send the boat over in approximately no time,
said the Idiot.
So, if it takes a man 2 hours to succumb to seasickness, a boat going over in less than that time would eliminate seasickness. More people would go, boats would run every hour, and Mr. Whitechoker could have a European trip every week without deserting his congregation.
Inestimable boon,
cried Mr. Whitechoker with a laugh.
Wouldn't it be?
said the Idiot.
Unless I change my mind, I think I shall stay in this country until this style of greyhound is perfected. Then, gentlemen, I shall tear myself away from you and seek knowledge in foreign pastures.
Well, I am sure,
said Mr. Pedagog.
I am sure that we all hope you will change your mind.
Then you want me to go abroad?
said the Idiot.
No,
said Mr. Pedagog.
No, not so much that as that we feel if you were to change your mind, the change could not fail to be for the better. A mind like yours ought to be changed.
Well, I don't know,
said the Idiot.
I suppose it would be a good thing if I broke it up into smaller denominations, but I've had it so long that I have become attached to it. But there is one thing about it. There is plenty of it, so that in case any of you gentlemen find your own insufficient, I shall be only too happy to give you a piece of it without charge. Meanwhile, if Mrs. Pedagog will kindly let me have my bill for last week, I'll be obliged.
It won't be ready until tomorrow, Mr. Idiot,
said the landlady in surprise.
I'm sorry,
said the Idiot, rising.
My scribbling paper has run out. I wanted to put in this morning, writing a poem on the back of it.
A poem? What about?
said Mr. Pedagog with an irritating chuckle.
It was to be a triolet on omniscience,
said the Idiot.
And, strange to say, sir, you were to be the hero, if by any possibility I could squeeze you into a French form.
End of chapter 3. Of the Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 4. The Incorporation of the Idiot.
How is business these days, Mr. Idiot?
Asked the poet as the one addressed laid down the morning paper with a careworn expression on his face.
Good, I hope.
Fair only,
replied the Idiot.
My honoured employer was quite blue about things yesterday, and if I hadn't staved him off, I think he'd have proposed swapping places with me. He has said quite often of late that I had the best of it, because all I had to earn was my salary, whereas he had to earn my salary and his own living besides. I offered to give him 10% of my salary for 10% of his living, but he said he guessed he wouldn't, adding that I seemed to be as great an idiot as ever.
I fancy he was right there,
said Mr. Pedagog.
I should really like to know how a man of your peculiar mental construction can be of the slightest practical value to a banker. I asked the question in all kindness, too, meaning to cast no reflections whatever upon either you or your employer. You are a roaring success in your own line, which is all one could ask of you.
There's a hominy for you, as the darky said to the hotel guest,
returned the Idiot.
Any person who says that discord exists at this table doesn't know what he is talking about. Even the oil and the vinegar mix in the caster. That is, I judge they do from the oleaginous appearance of the vinegar. But I am very useful to my employer, Mr. Pedagog. He says frequently that he wouldn't know what not to do if it were not for me.
Aren't you losing control of your tongue?
Queried the Bibliomaiac, looking at the Idiot in wonder.
Don't you mean that he says he wouldn't know what to do if it were not for you?
No, I don't,
said the Idiot.
I never lose control of my tongue. I meant exactly what I said. Mr. Barlow told me, in so many words, that if it were not for me, he wouldn't know what not to do. He calls me his back-action patent reversible counsellor. If he is puzzled over an intricate point, he sends for me and says, Such and such a thing being the case, Mr. Idiot, what would you do? Don't think about it, but tell me on impulse. Your thoughtless opinions are worth more to me than I can tell you. So I tell him on impulse just what I should do, whereupon he does the other thing, and comes out ahead in 9 cases out of 10.
And you confess it, eh?
said the Doctor, with a curve on his lip.
I certainly do,
said the Idiot.
The world must take me for what I am. I'm not going to be one thing for myself and build up a fictitious idiot for the world. The world calls you men of pretence conceited, whereas, by pretending to be something you are not, you give to the world what I should call convincing evidence that you are not at all conceited, but rather somewhat ashamed of what you know yourselves to be. Now, I rather believe in conceit, real honest pride in yourself as you know yourself to be. I am an idiot, and it is my ambition to be a perfect idiot. If I had been born a jackass, I should have endeavoured to be a perfect jackass.
You'd have found it easy,
said Mr. Pedagog dryly.
Would I?
said the Idiot.
I'll have to take your word for it, sir, for I have never been a jackass, and so cannot form an opinion on the subject.
Pride goeth before a fall,
said Mr. Whitechoker, seeing a chance to work in a moral reflection.
Exactly,
said the Idiot.
Wherefore I admire pride. It is a danger signal that enables man to avoid the fall. If Adam had had any pride, he'd never have fallen. But speaking about my controlling my tongue, it is not entirely out of the range of possibilities that I shall lose control of myself.
I expected that. Sooner or later,
said the Doctor.
Is it to be Bloomingdale, or a private madhouse you are going to?
Neither,
replied the Idiot calmly.
I shall stay here, for, as the poet says, "'Tis best to bear the ills we have, nor fly to those we know not of."
Oh,
jeered the poet.
I must confess, my dear Idiot, that I do not think you are a success in quotation. Hamlet spoke those lines differently.
Shakespeare's Hamlet did. My little personal Shakespeare makes his Hamlet an entirely different, less stilted sort of person,"
said the Idiot.
You have a personal Shakespeare, have you?
queried the Bibliomaiac.
"Of course I have,"
The Idiot answered.
"Haven't you?"
I have not,
said the Bibliomaiac shortly.
"Well, I'm sorry for you then,"
sighed the Idiot, putting a fried potato in his mouth.
"Very sorry. I wouldn't give a cent for another man's ideals. I want my own ideals, and I have my own ideal of Shakespeare. In fancy, Shakespeare and I have roamed the fields of Warwickshire together, and I've had more fun imagining the kind of things he and I would have said to each other than I ever got out of his published plays, few of which have escaped the ungentle hands of the devastators."
You mean commentators, I imagine,
said Mr. Pedagog.
"I do,"
said the Idiot.
"It's all the same whether you call them commentators or devastators. The result is the same. New editions of Shakespeare are issued every year, and people buy them to see not what Shakespeare has written, but what new quip some opinionated devastator has tried to fasten on his memory. In 100 years from now the works of Shakespeare will differ as much from what they are today as today's versions differ from what they were when Shakespeare wrote them. It's mighty discouraging to one like myself who would like to write works."
You are convicted out of your own mouth,
said the Bibliomaiac.
A moment since you wasted your pity on me because I didn't mutilate Shakespeare so as to make him my own, and now you attack the commentators for doing precisely the same thing. They are as much entitled to their opinions as you are to yours.
"Did you ever learn to draw parallels when you were in school?"
asked the Idiot.
I did, and I think I've made a perfect parallel in this case. You attack people in one breath for what you commiserate me for not doing in another,
said the Bibliomaiac.
"Not exactly,"
said the Idiot.
"I don't object to the commentators for commentating, but I do object to their putting out their versions of Shakespeare as Shakespeare. I might as well have my edition published. It certainly would be popular, especially where, in Julius Caesar, I introduced 5 Cassiuses and have them all fall on their swords together with military precision, like a Florodora sextet, for instance."
Well, I hope you'll never print such an atrocity as that,
cried the Bibliomaiac hotly.
If there's one thing in literature without excuse and utterly contemptible, it is the comic version, the parody of a masterpiece.
"You need have no fear on that score,"
returned the Idiot.
"I haven't time to rewrite Shakespeare, and since I try never to stop short of absolute completeness, I shall not embark on the enterprise. If I do, however, I shall not do as the commentators do, and put on my title page, 'Shakespeare, edited by Willie Wilkins,' but 'Shakespeare as he might have been had his plays been written by an idiot.'"
I have no doubt that you could do great work with Hamlet,
observed the poet.
"I think so myself,"
said the Idiot.
"but I shall never write Hamlet. I don't want to have my fair fame exposed to the merciless hands of the devastators."
I shall never cease to regret,
said Mr. Pedagog after a moment's thought,
that you are so timid. I should very much like to see the works of the Idiot. I admit that my desire is more or less a morbid one. It is quite on a plane with the feeling that prompts me to wish to see that unfortunate man on the Bowery who exhibits his forehead, which is 16 inches high, beginning with his eyebrows, for a dime. The strange, the bizarre nature has always interested me. The more unnatural the nature, the more I gloat upon it. From that point of view, I do most earnestly hope that when you are inspired with a work, you will let me at least see it.
"Very well,"
answered the Idiot.
"I shall put your name down as a subscriber to the Idiot Monthly Magazine, which some of my friends contemplate publishing. That is what I mean when I say I may shortly lose control of myself. These friends of mine profess to have been so impressed by my dicta that they have asked me if I would allow myself to be incorporated into a stock company, the object of which would be to transform my personality into printed pages. Hardly a day goes by but I devote a portion of my time to a poem, in which the thought is conspicuous either by its absence or its presence. My schemes for the amelioration of the condition of the civilized are notorious among those who know me. My views on current topics are eagerly sought for. My business instinct, as I have already told you, is invaluable to my employer, and my fiction is unsurpassed in its fictitiousness. What more is needed for a magazine? You have the poetry, the philanthropy, the man of today, the fictitiousness, and the business instinct necessary for the successful modern magazine, all concentrated in one person. Why not publish that person, say my friends, and I, feeling as I do that no man has a right to the selfish enjoyment of the great gifts nature has bestowed upon him, of course can only agree. I am to be incorporated with a capital stock of $500,000. $100,000 worth of myself I am to be permitted to retain. The rest my friends will subscribe for at 50 cents on the dollar. If any of you want shares in the enterprise, I have no doubt you can be accommodated.
I'm obliged to you for the opportunity,
said the doctor.
But I have to be very careful about things I take stock in. And in general, I regard you as a thing in which I should prefer not to take stock.
And I,
observed Mr. Pedagog,
I have never up to this time taken any stock in you, and I make it a rule to be guided in life by precedent. Therefore I must be counted out.
I'll wait until you're listed at the stock exchange,
put in the Bibliomaiac,
while thanking you just the same for the chance.
You can put me down for one chair, to be paid for in poetry,
said the poet with a wink at the idiot.
You'll never make good,
said the idiot slyly.
And I,
said the genial old gentleman who occasionally imbibes,
shall be most happy to take 5 shares to be paid for in advice and high balls. Moreover, if your company needs goodwill to establish its enterprise, you may count upon me for unlimited credit.
Oh, as for that,
said the idiot,
I have plenty of goodwill. Even Mr. Pedagog supplies me with more of it than I deserve, though by no means with all that I desire.
That goodwill is yours as an individual, Mr. Idiot,
returned the schoolmaster.
As a corporation, however, I cannot permit you to trade upon me even for that. Your value is, in my eyes, entirely too fluctuating.
And it is in the fluctuating stock that the great fortunes are made, Mr. Pedagog,
said the idiot.
As an individual, I appreciate your goodwill. As a corporation, I am soulless, without emotions, and so cherish no disappointments over your refusal. I think if the scheme goes through, it will be successful, and I fully expect to see the day when Idiot Preferred will be selling as high, if not higher, than steel, and leaving utterly behind any other industrial that ever was known, copper or rope.
If, like the railways, you could issue Peterman bonds, you might do very well,
said the doctor.
I think $10 million spent in bettering you might bring you up to par.
Or a consolidated first mortgage bond,
remarked the Bibliomaiac.
Consolidate the idiot with a man like Chamberlain or the German Emperor, and issue a $5 million mortgage on the result, and you might find people who'd take those bonds at 75.
You might, if they were a dollar bond printed on cartridge paper,
said Mr. Pedagog.
Then purchasers could paper their walls with them.
Rail on,
said the idiot.
I can stand it. When I begin paying quarterly dividends at 10% rate, you'll wish you had come in.
I don't know about that,
said Mr. Pedagog.
It would entirely depend.
On what?
Queried the idiot unwarily.
On whether that 10% was declared upon your own estimate of your value or upon ours. On yours, it would be fabulous. On ours, oh, well, what is the use of saying anything more about it? We are not going in it, and that's an end to it.
Well, I will go in it if you change your scheme,
said the doctor.
If instead of an idiot publishing company, you will try to float yourself as a consolidated gas company, you may count on me to take a controlling interest.
I will submit the proposition to my friends,
said the idiot calmly.
It would be something to turn out an honest gas company, which I should, of course, try to be, but I am afraid the public will not accept it. There is little demand for laughing gas, and besides they would fear to entrust you with a controlling interest for fear that you might blow the product out and the bills up, coining millions by mere inflation. They've heard of you, Doctor, and they know that is the sort of thing you'd be likely to do.
End of chapter 4. Five of the Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 5. University Extension.
I was surprised and gratified last evening, Mr. Idiot,
observed the schoolmaster as breakfast was served,
to see you at the University Extension lecture. I did not know that you admitted the necessity of further instruction in any matter pertaining to human knowledge.
I don't know that I do admit the necessity,
returned the idiot.
Sometimes when I take an inventory of the contents of my mind, it seems to me that about everything I need is there.
There you go again,
said the Bibliomaiac.
Why do you persist in your refusal to allow anyone to get a favorable impression concerning you? Mr. Pedagog unbends sufficiently to tell you that you have at last done something which he can commend, and you greet him with an idiotism which is practically a rebuff.
Very well said,
observed the schoolmaster with an acquiescent nod.
I came to this table this morning encouraged to believe that this young man was beginning to see the error in his ways. And I must confess to a great enough interest in him to say that I was pleased at that encouragement. I saw him at a lecture on literature at the Lyceum Hall last evening, and he appeared to be interested, and yet this morning he seems to show that he is utterly incorrigible. May I ask, sir, why you attended the lecture, if, as you say, your mind is already sufficiently well furnished?
Certainly you may ask that question,
replied the idiot.
I went to that lecture to have my impressions confirmed. That is all. I have certain well-defined notions concerning University Extension, and I wished to see if they were correct. I found that they were.
The lecture was not upon University Extension, but upon Romanticism, and it was a most able discourse,
retorted Mr. Pedagog.
Very likely,
said the idiot.
I did not hear it. I did not want to hear it. I have my own ideas concerning Romanticism, which do not need confirmation or correction. I have already confirmed and corrected them. I went to see the audience, and not to hear Professor Peterkin exploding theories.
It is a pity the chair you occupied was wasted upon you,
snapped Mr. Pedagog.
I agree with you,
said the idiot.
I could have got a much better view of the audience if I had been permitted to sit on the stage, but Professor Peterkin needed all that for his gestures. However, I saw enough from where I sat to confirm my impression that University Extension is not so much of a public benefit as a social fad. There was hardly a soul in the audience who could not have got all that Professor Peterkin had to tell him out of his books. There was hardly a soul in the audience who could not have afforded to pay $1 at least for the seat he occupied. There was not a soul in the audience who had paid more than 10 cents for his seat or her seat. And those for whose benefit the lecture was presumably given, the 10-cent people, were crowded out. The lectures themselves are not instructive, Professor Peterkin's particularly, except in so far as it is instructive to hear what Professor Peterkin thinks on this or that subject, and his desire to be original forces him to cook up views which no one else ever held, with the result that what he says is most interesting and proper to be presented to the attention of a discriminating audience, but not proper to be presented to an audience that is supposed to come there to receive instruction.
You have just said that you did not listen to the lecture. How do you know that what you say is true?
Put in the Bibliomaiac.
I know Professor Peterkin,
said the idiot.
Does he know you?
Sneered Mr. Pedagog.
I don't think he would remember me if you would speak my name in his presence,
observed the idiot calmly.
But that is easily accounted for. The professor never remembers anybody but himself.
Well, I admit,
said Mr. Pedagog,
that the professor's lectures were rather advanced for the comprehension of a person like the idiot. Nevertheless, it was an enjoyable occasion, and I doubt if the fulminations of our friend here will avail against University Extension.
You speak a sad truth,
said the idiot.
Social fads are impervious to fulmination, as Solomon might have said had he thought of it. As long as the thing is a social fad, it will thrive, and on the whole, perhaps it ought to thrive. Anything which gives society something to think about has its value, and the mere fact that it makes society think is proof of that value.
We seem to be in a philosophic frame of mind this morning,
said Mr. Whitechoker.
We are,
returned the idiot.
That's one thing about University Extension. It makes us philosophic. It has made a stoic of my dear old daddy.
Oh, yes,
cried Mr. Pedagog.
You have a father, haven't you? I had forgotten that.
Wherein,
said the idiot,
we differ. I haven't forgotten that I have one. And by the way, it is from him that I first heard of University Extension. He lives in a small manufacturing town not many miles from here, and is distinguished in the town because, without being stingy, he lives within his means. He has a way of paying his grocer's bills which makes of him a marked man. He hasn't much more money than he needs, but when the University Extension movement reached the town, he was interested. The prime movers in the enterprise went to him and asked him if he wouldn't help it along, dilating upon the benefits which would accrue to those whose education stopped short with graduation from the high schools. It was most plausible. The notion that for 10 cents a lecture the working masses could learn something about art, history and letters, could gather in something about the sciences, and all that, appealed to him, and while he could afford it much more ill than the smart people, the 400 of the town, he chipped in. He paid $50 and was made an honorary manager. He was proud enough of it too, and he wrote a long enthusiastic letter to me about it. It was a great thing, and he hoped the state, which had been appealed to help the movement along, would take a hand in it. If we educate the masses to understand and to appreciate the artistic, the beautiful, he wrote, we need have little fear for the future. Ignorance is the greatest foe we have to contend against in our national development, and it is the only thing that can overthrow a nation such as ours is. And then what happened? Professor Peterkin came along and delivered 10 or a dozen lectures. The masses went once or twice and found the platform occupied by a man who talked to them about romanticism and realism, who told them that Dickens was trash, who exalted Tolstoy and Ibsen, but who never let them into the secret of what romanticism was, and who kept them equally in the dark as to the significance of realism. They also found the best seats in the lecture hall occupied by the smart set, in full evening dress, who talked almost as much and as loudly as did Professor Peterkin. The masses did not even learn manners at Professor Peterkin's first and second lectures, and the third and fourth found them conspicuous by their absence. All they learnt was that they were ignorant, and that other people were better than they, and what my father learnt was that he had subscribed $50 to promote a series of social functions for the diversion of the 400 and the aggrandizement of Professor Peterkin. He started in for what might be called romanticism, and he got a realism that he did not like in less time than it takes to tell of it. And today, in that town, University Extension is such a fad that when, some weeks ago, the swell club of that place talked of appointing Thursday evening as its club night, it was found to be impossible, for the reason that it might interfere with the attendance upon the University Extension lectures. That, Mr. Pedagog, is a matter of history, and can be proven, and last night's audience confirmed the impression which I had formed from what my father had told me. Professor Peterkin's lectures are interesting to you, a schoolmaster, but they are pure Greek to me, who would like to know more about letters. I would gather more instruction from your table talk in an hour than I could from Professor Peterkin's whole course.
You flatter me,
said Mr. Pedagog.
No,
returned the idiot.
If you knew how little the ignorant gained from Peterkin, you would not necessarily call it flattery, if one could say he learnt more from your conversation over a griddle cake.
You misconceive the whole situation, I think, nevertheless,
said Mr. Whitechoker.
As I understand it, supplementary lectures and examinations based on them are held after the lectures, when the practical instruction is given with great thoroughness.
I'm glad you spoke of that,
said the idiot.
I had forgotten that part of it. Professor Peterkin received pay for his lectures, which dealt in theories only. Plain Mr. Barton, who delivered the supplementary lectures, got nothing. Professor Peterkin taught nothing, but he represented University Extension. Plain Mr. Barton did the work and represented nothing. Both reached society. Neither reached the masses. In my native town, plain Mr. Barton's supplementary lectures, which were simply an effort to unravel the Peterkin complications, were attended by the same people in smaller crowds, people of social standing who were curious enough to devote an hour a week to an endeavour to find out the meaning of what Professor Peterkin had told them at the function the week before. The students examined were mostly ladies, and I happen to know that in a large proportion they were ladies whose husbands could have afforded to pay Professor Peterkin his salary 10 times over as a private tutor.
As I look at it,
said Mr. Pedagog gravely,
It does not make much difference to whom your instruction is given, so long as it instructs. What if these lectures do interest those who are comparatively well off? Your society woman may be as much in need of an extended education as your factory girl. The university extension idea is to convey knowledge to people who would not otherwise get it. It simply sets out to improve minds. If the social mind needs improvement, why not improve it? Why condemn a system because it does not discriminate in the minds selected for improvement?
I don't condemn a system which sets out to improve minds irrespective of conditions,
replied the idiot.
But I should most assuredly condemn a man, or a set of men, who induced me to subscribe to a bread fund for the poor, and who afterwards expended that money on cream cakes for the Tsar of Russia. The fact that the Tsar of Russia wanted the cream cakes and was willing to accept them would not affect my feelings in the matter, though I have no doubt the people in charge of the fund would find themselves far more conspicuous for having departed from the original idea. Some of them might be knighted for it, if the Tsar happened to be passionately fond of cream cakes.
Then, having attacked this system, what would you have? Would you have university extension stopped?
Asked the Bibliomaiac.
Not at all,
returned the idiot.
Anything which can educate society is a good thing, but I should change the name of it from university extension to social expansion, and I should compel those whose minds were broadened by it to pay the bills.
But as yet you have failed to hit the nail on the head,
persisted the Bibliomaiac.
The masses can attend these lectures if they wish to, and on your own statement, they don't. You don't seem to consider that point, or if you do, you don't meet it.
I don't think it necessary to meet it,
said the idiot.
Though I will say that if you were one of the masses, a girl, say, with one dress, threadbare, poor, and ill-fitting, and possessed of a natural bit of pride, you would find little pleasure in attending a lecture your previous education does not permit of your comprehending, and sitting through an evening with a lot of finely dressed smart folk with their backs turned towards you. The plebeians have some pride, my dear Bibliomaiac, and they are decidedly averse to mixing with the swells. They would like to be educated, but they don't care to be snubbed for the privilege of being mystified by a man like Professor Peterkin, even for so small a sum as 10 cents an evening.
End of chapter 5. Of the Inventions of the Idiot by John Kendrick Bangs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 6. Social Expansion.
We were talking about university extension the other day, Mr. Pedagog,
said the idiot as the schoolmaster folded up the newspaper and put it in his pocket.
And I, as you remember, suggested that it might better be called social expansion.
Did you?
Said Mr. Pedagog coldly.
I don't remember much about it. I rarely make a note of anything you may say.
Well, I did suggest the change of name, whether your memory is retentive or not, and I've been thinking the matter over a good deal since, and I think I've got hold of an idea,
returned the idiot.
In that case,
said the Bibliomaiac,
we would better lock the door. If you have really got hold of an idea, you should be very careful not to let it get away from you.
No danger of that,
said the idiot with a smile.
I have it securely locked up here,
tapping his forehead.
It must be lonesome,
said Mr. Pedagog.
And rather uncomfortable if it's a real idea,
observed the doctor.
An idea in the idiot's mind must feel somewhat as a tall, stout Irish maid feels when she goes to her bedroom in one of those Holland flat houses.
You men are losing a great opportunity,
said the idiot with a scornful glance at the three professional gentlemen.
The idea of your following the professions of pedagogy, medicine, and literature, when the three of you combined could make a fortune as an incarnate comic paper. I don't see why you don't make a combination, like those German bands that play on the street corners, and go about from door to door, and crack your jokes just as they crack their music. I'm sure you'd take, particularly in front of barber shops.
It would be hard on the comic papers,
said the poet, who was getting a little unpopular with his fellow boarders because of his tendency, recently developed, to take the idiot's part in the breakfast table discussions.
They might be so successful that the barber shops, instead of taking the comic papers for their customers to read, would employ one or more of them to sit in the middle of the room and crack jokes aloud.
We couldn't rival the comic papers, Ho.
said the doctor, wishing to save his dignity by taking the bull by the horns.
We might do the jokes well enough, but the comic papers are chiefly pictorial.
You'd be pictorial enough,
said the idiot.
Wasn't it you, Mr. Pedagog, that said that the doctor here looked like one of Cruikshank's physicians, or as if he had stepped out of Dickens' pages, or something like it?
I never said anything of the sort,
cried the schoolmaster wrathfully.
And you know I didn't.
Who was it said that?
asked the idiot innocently, looking about the table.
It couldn't have been Mr. Whitechoker, and I know it wasn't the poet, or my genial friend who occasionally imbibes. Mr. Pedagog denies it. I didn't say it. Mrs. Pedagog wouldn't say it. That leaves only two of us, the Bibliomaiac and the doctor himself. I don't think the doctor would make a personal remark of that kind, and, well, there is but one conclusion. Mr. Bibliomaiac, I am surprised.
What?
roared the Bibliomaiac, glaring at the idiot.
Do you mean to fasten the impertinence on me?
Far from it,
said the idiot.
Very far from it. It is fate, sir, that has done that. The circumstantial evidence against you is strong. But then, mercifully enough, circumstantial evidence is not permitted to hang a man.
Now see here, Mr. Idiot,
said the Bibliomaiac, firmly and impressively.
I want you to distinctly understand that I'm not going to have you put words into my mouth that I never uttered.
Pray, don't attack me,
said the idiot.
I haven't made any charge against you. I only asked who could have said that the doctor looked like a creation of Cruikshank. I couldn't have said it, because I don't think it. Mr. Pedagog denies it. In fact, everyone here has a clear case of innocence, excepting yourself. And I don't believe you said it, only the chain of circumstance...
Oh, hang your chain of circumstance,
interrupted the Bibliomaiac.
It is hung, and it appears to make you very uncomfortable. However, as I was saying, I think I have got hold of an idea involving a truly philanthropic and by no means selfish scheme of social expansion.
Hey-oh,
sighed Mr. Pedagog.
I sometimes think that if I had not the honor to be the husband of our landlady, I'd move away from here. Your views, sir, are undermining my constitution.
You only think so, Mr. Pedagog,
replied the idiot.
You are simply going through a process of intellectual reconstruction at my hands. You feel exactly as a man feels who has been shut up in the dark for years and suddenly finds himself in a flood of sunlight. I am doing with you as an individual what I would have society do for mankind at large. In other words, while I am working for individual expansion upon the raw material I find here, I would have society buckle down to the enlargement of itself by the improvement of those outside of itself.
If you swim in water as well as you do in verbiage,
said the Bibliomaiac,
you must be able to go 3 or 4 strokes without sinking.
Oh, as for that, I can swim like a duck,
said the idiot.
You can't sink me.
I fancied not,
observed Mr. Pedagog with a smile at his own joke.
You are so light, I wonder, indeed, that you don't rise up into space, anyhow.
What a delightful condition of affairs that suggestion opens up,
said the idiot, turning to the poet.
If I were you, I'd make a poem on that. Something like this, for instance. I am so very, very light that gravitation curbs not me. I rise up through the atmosphere till all the world I plainly see. I dance about among the clouds, an airy, happy human kite. The breezes toss me here and there, to my exceeding great delight. And when I would return to sup, to breakfast, or perchance to dine, I haul myself once more to earth by tugging on a piece of twine.
Mr. Pedagog grinned broadly at this.
You aren't entirely without your good points,
he said.
If we ever accept your comic paper idea, we'll have to rely on you for the nonsense poetry.
Thank you,
said the idiot.
I'll help. If I had a man like you to give me the suggestions, I could make a fortune out of poetry. The only trouble is I have to quarrel with you before I can get you to give me a suggestion, and I despise bickering.
So do I,
returned Mr. Pedagog.
Let's give up bickering and turn our attention to, social extension, is it?
Yes, or social expansion,
said the idiot.
Some years ago the world was startled to hear that in the city of New York there were not more than 400 people who were entitled to social position, and, as I understand it, as time has progressed, the number has still further diminished. Last year the number was only 150, and as I read the social news of today, not more than 25 people are now beyond all question in the swim. At dinners, balls, functions of all sorts, you read the names of these same 25 over and over again as having been present. Apparently no others attended, or if they did, they were not so indisputably entitled to be present that their names could be printed in the published accounts. Now all of this shows that society is dying out, and that if things keep on as they are now going, it will not be many years before we shall become a people without society, a nation of plebeians.
Your statement so far is lucid and logical,
said Mr. Pedagog, who did not admire society, so called, and who did not object to the goring of an ox in which he was not personally interested.
Well, why is this social contraction going on?
Asked the Idiot.
Clearly because social expansion is not an accepted fact. If it were, society would grow. Why does it not grow? Why are its ranks not augmented? There is raw material enough. You would like to get into the swim. So would I. But we don't know how. We read books of etiquette, but they are far from being complete. I think I make no mistake when I say they are utterly valueless. They tell us no more than the funny journal tells us when it says, "Never eat peas with a spoon, never eat pie with a knife, never put salt on a prune, never throw crumbs at your wife." They tell most of us what we all knew before. They tell us not to wear our hats in the house. They tell us all the obvious things, but the subtleties of how to get into society they do not tell us. The comic papers give us some idea of how to behave in society. We know from reading the funny papers that a really swell young man always leans against a mantelpiece when he is calling, that the swell girl sits on a comfortable divan with her feet on a tiger-skin rug, and they converse in epigram. Sometimes the epigram is positively rude. When it is not rude, it is so dull that no one wonders that the tiger's head on the rug represents the tiger as yawning. But while this is instructive, it teaches us how to behave on special occasions only. You or I might call upon a young woman who did not sit on a divan, who had no tiger-skin rug to put her feet on, and whose parlour had a mantelpiece against which we could not lean comfortably. What are we to do then? As far as they go, the funny papers are excellent, but they don't go far enough. They give us attractive pictures of fashionable dinners, but it is always of the dinner after the game course. Some of us would like to know how society behaves while the soup is being served. We know that after the game course, society girls reach across the table and clink wine glasses with young men, but we do not know what they do before they get to the clink stage. Nowhere is this information given. Etiquette books are silent on the subject. And though I have sought everywhere for information, I do not know to this day how many salted almonds one may consume at dinner without embarrassing one's hostess. Now, if I can't find out, the million can't find out. Wherefore, instead of shutting themselves selfishly up, and by so doing, forcing society finally into dissolution, why cannot some of these people who know what is what give object lessons to the million, educate them in savoir-faire? Last summer there was a play put on at one of our theatres, in which there was a scene at a racetrack. At one side was a tally-ho coach. For the first week the coach was an utterly valueless accessory, because the people on it were the ordinary supers in the employ of the theatre. They did not know how to behave on a coach, and nobody was interested. The management was suddenly seized with a bright idea. They invited several swell young men who knew how things were done on coaches to come and do these things on their coach. The young men came and imparted a realism to the scene that made that coach the centre of attraction. People who went to that play departed educated in coach etiquette. Now there lies my scheme in a nutshell. If these 25, the old guard of society, which dines but never surrenders, will give once a week a social function in some place like Madison Square Garden, to which the million may go merely as spectators, not as participators, is there any doubt that they would fail to be instructed? The garden will seat 8 or 10,000 people. Suppose, for an instance, that a dozen of your best exponents of what is what were to give a dinner in the middle of the arena, with 10,000 people looking on. Do you mean to say that of all the vast audience, no one would learn thereby how to behave at a dinner?
It's a great scheme,
said the doctor.
It is,
said the idiot.
And I venture to say that a course of, say, 12 social functions, given in that way, would prove so popular that the garden would turn away every night twice as many people as it could accommodate.
It would be instructive, no doubt,
said the Bibliomaiac.
But how would it expand society? Would you have examinations?
Most assuredly,
said the idiot.
At the end of the season, I should have a rigid examination of all who chose to apply. I would make them dine in the presence of a committee of expert diners. I would have them pass a searching examination in the art of wearing a dress suit, in the science of entering a drawing room, in the art of behaviour at afternoon teas, and all the men who applied should also be compelled to pass a physical examination as an assurance that they were equal to the task of getting an ice for a young lady at a ball.
Society would get to be too inclusive and would cease to be exclusive,
suggested Mr. Whitechoker.
I think not, said the idiot. I should not give a man or a woman the degree of B.S. unless he or she had passed an examination of 100%.
B.S.?
queried Mr. Pedagog.
Yes,
returned the idiot.
Bachelor of Society, a degree which, once earned, should entitle one to recognition as a member of the upper ten anywhere in Christendom.
It is superb,
cried Mr. Pedagog enthusiastically.
Yes,
said the idiot.
At 10 cents a function it would beat university extension out of sight, and further, it would preserve society. If we lose society, we lose caste. And, worse than all, our funny men would have to go out of business, for there would be no fads or willy boys left to ridicule.
End of chapter 6.